A year ago, I made a video about black home ownership in this country and nearly 200,000 people watched it. And I need to come back and tell you, the situation is actually worse than what I thought. And look, I had to come back because there is some new data. Research has been done by the LSE, the Resolution Foundation, and the Joseph Rowntree Foundation. And what it says, it hurt me a little bit because the gap didn't close. It actually got wider in the year since I've made that video. So let's just get straight into it. I don't really want to waste too much time. As you can see, I'm in a new setup. This is actually my new studio. I'm looking forward to recording here. Anyway, in this video, I'm going to show you three things basically. The first thing that I looked at is what the numbers actually look like right now compared to what I told you a year ago. Secondly, what's changed in the housing market over the last 2 years and why it's basically hit us harder than almost anyone else. And the third thing that I want to cover, because I don't just want to talk and sit here and point out the problems, I want to show you what is actually being done and what you can do right now, basically, because there's a lot to cover. So before we get into the data, I want to plant something in your mind though, because there's one statistic in this video, one number that I think is the single most damning fact about the racial wealth in the UK. And we're going to get to it. But first, I need to build the context for you, because without context, this number just kind of sounds unbelievable. Last time I sat here, the facts and figures that I gave you were from around 2016 to 2018. There was some historical context as well. I did reference recent data, but there's data from 2025. And this time, a lot of the data has come from the government itself, and it was pulled from the English Housing Survey. And here's where we are. Black African home ownership was around 20%. Now it's 22%. Black Caribbean home ownership was around 30%, now it's 31%. White households, 68%, now it's 70%. So yes, technically, our numbers went up slightly. But the problem is, the gap didn't actually close. White households rose at roughly the same pace as we did, which means that we are still about 48 percentage points behind. Nearly half a century of difference on paper. And the social housing picture is even harder to sit and watch. Almost half, 48% of Black Caribbean households are currently in social rented accommodation. That is actually up from 41% that I mentioned last year. For Black African households, it's 40%. Compare that to just 16% of white British households. Nearly 1 in 2 of us is renting from a council or housing association. And the data on private renting tells the same story. 38% of Black African households are in the private rented sector, paying above market rates with low security and pretty much building zero wealth from it, which, listen, sometimes life is life. You have to sleep somewhere. The number that I was talking about at the start of this video, well, here it is. Listen to this specifically. The median property wealth of a Black household in the UK is £0. That sounds a bit weird. I had to Google it about 3 or 4 times. I had to look at 3 or 4 different sources because I was so confused. But yeah, the median property wealth of a Black household in the UK is £0. And it just doesn't really make sense. And I was a little bit confused by that. And that finding was from the Joseph Rowntree Foundation, published in December, last December, 2025. And it's backed up by the LSE research published in the same month, which found that the ethnic wealth gap has widened significantly since 2012. White British and Indian households have seen a substantial increases in wealth over the last decade, and Black Africans and Black Caribbeans and Bangladeshi households remain with almost no accumulated household wealth, literally none. And what we need to talk about is the effect of that and how it's obviously affecting us as a people. And it's not that we're just behind. It's that for the average Black household in this country, decades of renting, decades of paying someone else's mortgage has left a total property wealth of nothing. And it ultimately becomes a compounding problem. You rent, you pay, you have nothing to show for it, nothing to pass down, nothing for your kids to build on. And the next generation starts from zero again. Now, some of you are going to say, okay, this is depressing. What do we do about it? I want to explain why I even got to this point in the first place, because if you don't understand the mechanisms, any solution is going to feel like sticking plaster on a broken arm, and that doesn't always work. I've broken a few bones. When I read all this information, what surprised me the most is that we're actually working harder. As a people, we are working harder. We're more educated than ever before. We're earning more. A lot of Black people are earning a lot more money, and the gap is still widening. So the question that we need to ask ourselves is why is that even taking place, considering the amount of effort and the amount of hard work that Black people are doing? It's not like we're not doing anything. And the answer actually has nothing to do with direct income, but it does have something to do with what happens before you even sit down with a mortgage broker. Number one is the deposit problem. In 2024, the average first-time buyer deposit in the UK was 61 grand. And in London, where most of us black people actually live, it was around nearly £109,000. And here is what the data shows us. 37% of first-time buyers now receive their deposit as a gift or loan from family. And that's actually an increase from 27% just a few years ago. The bank of mum and dad is now officially a significant part of the British property ladder. And for those of you that have watched most of my videos, we know about the issue of black fathers in the community. So, for the communities where the median property wealth is zero, there is no bank of mum and dad. There is literally no family gift. I could have done with a good 60 G's, I tell you that. And there's just you trying to save 60 grand out of your salary while also paying rent, while also sending money back home to Nigeria, Ghana, Jamaica, which, as I said in my original video, is a reality for a lot of us and a lot of our parents. The second point I want to make here is mortgage rates are different. After the 2020 mini budget crisis, mortgage rates shot up to over 6%. They have come down since. The Bank of England base rate is now 3.75% as of early 2026, and 2-year fixed deals are sitting around 4.5%. But there's always a catch. You got to know there's always a catch. When rates are high, the people who can still buy are the people who have large deposits. Large deposits buffer you from the rates rising because you are borrowing less. Who has large deposits? People who inherited property wealth or received family gifts, which, as we've just established, statistically excludes most black households. You can see the cycle you can see what's going on, right? And then there's a part that nobody in the government seems to talk about. So in prep for this video, I tried to research as many government housing announcements I could in the last 2 years. All the schemes, all the press releases, and I want to tell you what I found. Nothing. Not one single housing policy, mortgage scheme, or government initiative specifically to address the ethnic home ownership gap. Help to Buy ended in March 2023, if I remember correctly, and there was no real replacement. The government introduced the 2025 mortgage guarantee scheme, which allows buyers to access 95% mortgages with a 5% deposit. I'm not sure how helpful that really is, and I feel like that's a dangerous policy, but hey, who am I? But in London, 5% of the average property price is still over 25k. For black African households where median wealth is zero, saving even that is not straightforward. And in April 2025, the stamp duty threshold for first-time buyers got cut, which again sounds good. The zero rate threshold dropped from 425 grand back down to 300 grand. The proportion of first-time buyers now paying stamp duty effectively doubled overnight. So we basically went from losing a scheme to an additional cost landing on people already struggling with deposits. I need you to kind of understand what's taking place, because if you think about what's taking place, you will realize that we are at a disadvantage from the get-go. And before the people come in the comments, oh, you're being a victim, I'm just highlighting the reality of how difficult it is for people to get on the property ladder. And look, man, I'm not here to do a party political broadcast. I don't get into politics. But there was some research done by Sheffield University in 2024, and it described what it called a political turn in English housing policy. The idea that because we do not explicitly talk about race in housing, the gap will somehow close on its own. The data that we've just looked at tells you exactly where that approach leads. So, if the government ain't going to fix it, who is? Because I am someone who personally believes that we shouldn't be relying on governments because governments are not here to serve us. And I know that sounds crazy, but that's my personal belief. I want to be clear about something. I'm not trying to just talk and end this video with a rant and leave you feeling hopeless. That's not what this is for. And one of the big shifts I'm making in my content this year is not to just observe and analyze problems, but to also come up with ideas on what I think we can do to solve things. I'm not a politician, but I have ideas. And with that being said, in this research, I did find something else. There is a growing ecosystem of black-led organizations in this country working to close the gap from the ground up. And the biggest issue is it doesn't get as much attention as it deserves. Our community is so focused on arguing about nonsense online, any degenerate stuff. We don't talk about enough of this financial education and helping kids and helping young boys and girls that are suffering in fatherless homes, so on and so forth. We're too busy doing nonsense. But the first thing I want to talk about is education. Ayesha Afori, some of you may know her as a former Goldman Sachs wealth advisor. She was a Morgan Stanley investment banker, and she founded the Black Property Network. They basically run education programs, property investment training, webinars. They've built a community around the exact financial education and literacy that helps us close this gap. There is also the Black Youth Finance, funded by Andrew Francis, specifically teaching young black people about budgeting, saving, building wealth from an early age. These are things that I wish I had when I was younger because I didn't know about any of this. The truth is, the time to start this conversation, it's not when you're 30 like me or someone who's trying to get a mortgage. It's actually when you're 14, 13, 12, whatever. It should be back then. Another pillar that I find to be very, very important is obviously your personal network. I think a lot of people downplay how important your network is. And I do say your network is your net worth. And the Black Women in Real Estate group, which was founded by Hannah Afolabi, basically connects over 400 Black women across the UK property industry. And this matters more than people realize because only 1.2% of the UK's real estate workforce is Black or an ethnic minority, which I hate using that term ethnic minority because we're not minority people, but it is what it is. And that basically means that when you're trying to get advice, trying to navigate the system, the people on the outside of the table very, very rarely look like you. And I, from experience of buying my own house, I know kind of obviously what that looks like and what that feels like. Building a professional community, in my opinion, like within the industry, is part of how the next generation can get better access, right? And the last pillar that I think would be very beneficial is community finance. And yes, Partner, my yard people, Partner's making a comeback. The Windrush generation, our parents, grandparents, whatever it may be, they brought the idea of Partner to the UK because British banks didn't actually lend to them. A lot of people don't know this. And it's not even ancient history. It's within living memory. My mum and my granddad and my grandmother probably are aware of this. And young people in their 20s and 30s are using modern versions of the Partner scheme in some ways. Digital saving, WhatsApp groups, all that type of stuff. And as I was doing some research for this video, I actually saw that the Bank of England, they ran an exhibition on Partner schemes at their museum. And that's how deep this tradition runs in our financial history. None of this replaces systemic change. And I want to be honest about that because, you know, we have to be real about the circumstances that we're in. But waiting for a system to change before you act is a guaranteed path to more of the same thing, right? I always say, and I say it time and time again, no one's coming to save us. And speaking of acting, I want to come back to something that I said in the original video. If you remember, it nearly got 200,000 views. Come on, guys, go run it up. Something that the data now confirms in a way I find slightly uncomfortable, I guess is probably what I would say. I specifically spoke about, you know, generational wealth and the lack of it in our communities, right? About how the reason why like white British households sit at 70% ownership and we sit at 22, it's not just like direct income. It is accumulated compounding wealth passed from one generation to the next. The research backs that up in even more detail than what I shared in my previous video last year. Cambridge University did a study on this. They actually published some work showing that for the Black households where parents were renters, home ownership in the next generation fell from 49% to just 32% between the 1950s and the 1970s. Just keep up with me for 1 second. The inheritance data is also stark because the average white British person inherits roughly 3,000 more over a 2-year period than any other ethnic group. It does not sound like that much on its own. It's only $3,000, but compounded across multiple generations, across families in the community, you can kind of see how it can become enormous. It can become a big thing. And that's ultimately why the urgency matters. Every year you are not on the property ladder is a year someone else is building equity that you are not. And a lot of Black people get caught up in this thing of should I rent, should I buy? I don't think that we all need to be buying houses, but I do think that having home ownership in our generation, in our families, is a great foundation for wealth. And that's just my opinion. And look, I ended up moving out of London to get a house. I got a bigger house, less postcode, right? And that conversation is still worth having. Do Black people need to be so concentrated in London? Why don't we leave? I don't know. I'm still in London every single week. I'm in London right now. But the honest conversation that we need to have, honestly, is this. If you can just get on the ladder, whether you are going to live in it on your own or you're going to buy to rent it out, the time to start thinking about that is not when you are ready. It is actually right now, even if you don't have the money. Because the one thing that this research cannot factor in is what you decide to do with this information today. And the reason why I'm changing the focus of my videos into more advice is because the data shows us where we are now. It does not decide where we end up. Now, I know I've been away for a little bit, but I was setting up this studio. So let me just bring this full circle. When I made the original video, I laid out statistics and I shared my ideas. Nearly 200,000 of you watched it. And the thing I've realized making this update is the reason that video connected is because that is not an abstract policy problem. It is our parents' story. It is our story. It is the story of people who came here, worked hard, sent money home, raised families, and in many cases, they never got to own the piece of ground that they built their lives on. The data from 2025 last year is pretty uncomfortable. Median property wealth of a Black household, 0. 48% of Black Caribbean households socially rented. The ethnic wealth gap widening, not closing. No government policy specifically to target any of this. But here is what I am going to actually leave you with. I'm praying that the community will wake up, all of us. The conversations are happening. Let's talking about the nonsense that happens in our community and the urban community, and maybe more financial conversations, maybe more networking, because the networks are being built and the education is spreading and there are organizations out there. The generation coming up now, our generation, the kids we're raising, they can be the ones who change the numbers, not by waiting for a policy change, but by starting the conversation earlier, taking education seriously, getting on the ladder wherever and whenever they can, and passing something, anything, because it can't be zero any longer. That has to become something. And something, given time, becomes everything. Now, if this video made you think differently about wealth, property, and what we pass down to the next generation, there is one more thing I need you to watch, because everything I talked about, the gap, the ladder, the generational piece, it all connects back to a bigger question. How do you actually build wealth when you are starting from nothing in a system that is not built with you in mind? And I actually cover the issue with that, especially in the Black community, in this video right here. Peace.